Greetings and a very warm welcome into the sneak peek into ICWA's panel discussion on rearming Europe, prospects and pitfalls. I'm Sugandhi, research analyst at the Council, and it's my pleasure to interact with our experts for the panel discussion. Bringing their expertise to this panel, we have with us Ambassador Gurjeet Singh, former ambassador to Germany, Indonesia, Ethiopia, ASEAN, and the African Union, and honorary professor IIT Indore. Welcome to the Council, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, how do you think the evolving security environment in Europe, particularly the war in Ukraine and rising geopolitical tensions, reshape the rationale for rearming, and what should Europe's strategic priorities be over the next decade? And how will Europe's rearmament impact global geopolitics? Your take, sir.
Thank you. When I served in Europe, last in Germany, earlier in Italy, these were never the issues. Europe was working quietly with the Russians, and even the Ukraine issue, they wanted to solve them by themselves through the Minsk process. But the US policy pushed them into more aggressive postures against Russia. And today, the United States is asking for a peace on Russian terms in Ukraine, whereas the Europeans are standing up for Ukraine. On what basis, I'm not so sure, because I don't think they yet have the strength. They have declared their intent, but not the strength. So in the years that I worked in Germany, for instance, the total strength of German armed forces was smaller than India's border security force. I don't think that has changed. When they provided armaments to Ukraine, almost $60 billion worth, I think they have finished their stock. So if Europe was to fight a war now, I don't think they are in a position. So the geopolitics of the American foreign policy has sort of left Europe behind. On NATO, they are hustled into raising their contribution to 5% of the GDP. And on the EU, they are forced to militarize by the new various programs that the EU is doing. Otherwise, the EU was largely a functional body. So geopolitics has gone out of European control, and they are trying very hard to come back to it by playing the game with the new rules. But that competence to play by the new rules is something I am not so certain about.
Right. Thank you for your valuable insight, sir. Moving forward, we have Lieutenant General Sanjay Verma with us, former Director General of Weapons and Equipment, Army Headquarters, Ministry of Defence, Government of India, and Distinguished Fellow, Council of Strategic and Defence Research. So, in this era driven by technology, from drones to AI-enabled defence systems, what technological investments do you think should European states prioritize to remain militarily relevant, and what risks do these emerging technologies pose? Your take, sir.
Thank you very much. In fact, you have yourself spelled out in the preamble when you're talking about what technologies. The flavor of the day is unmanned systems, aerial, land, maritime. And specifically, I'm talking about drones, swarm of drones. So if you look at the most of the platforms, weapon systems which are being exploited in Ukraine or anywhere else, they're all centered around the unmanned systems. So this will be the first technology on which not only within the Asian subcontinent, even the European Union will have to focus on. Along with that, if I can flag a few technologies, if we are talking about drones, swarms, there has to be a counter drone systems, because naturally the world over the technologies are going to look at these. So a counter drone systems, and along with that, we just saw what was very relevant in Op Sindoor, an integrated air defense system. So that will be one, we have to develop a technology which can go into the adversary and also safeguard our own interests. These are two fundamental. Along with that, we need a very robust artificial intelligence-backed command, control, decision support system. Because if you have to close the OODA loop, these are the imperatives. The next one would be, if we have to keep our drones, keep our aerial systems We need to have our own satellite so that we are not taken by surprise. We should have a clear environment to operate. Along with that, if all this is happening, it is the electromagnetic spectrum, the cyber defense and the cyber offensive. One technology which we don't talk much about and will go a long way is cyber as an offensive weapon. And last, if not the least, which is also very important, we are looking at loitering munitions. If you see, it was in the newspapers a few days back, the two deals done with the USA. One was Javelin, the other we are looking at Excalibur. Now, what is Excalibur? Loitering munitions and autonomous logistics support system. So these are certain technologies. And if you give me a few seconds more, I will just say, whatever technologies come up, there are two fundamental technologies which are the substrate. Advanced materials, rare earth, and the second is renewable energy resources. Where will the batteries come? Where will the power come from? And if we have to have good materials for drones, for loitering munitions, for rockets, we need good materials. So these are 5 to 6 technologies on which we need to work on.
Right.
And the European Union will also be putting its entire might.
Right. Thank you so much for your valuable insights, sir. Joining us next in the conversation is Professor Ummu Salma Bawa, Chairperson and Jean Monnet Chair, Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, and Chairperson, Special Center for National Security Studies, JNU. Ma'am, as we know that rearming requires a massive long-term financial commitments. So how can European governments balance increased defense spending with domestic priorities such as social welfare, energy transitions, or economic stability? Your take, ma'am.
So thank you so much. I think if you look at ReArm Europe program, it has various components to it. There is a domestic component, there is a European level component, and there is a private sector component. And it's not that all the targets would be met in the very first year itself, it has been announced earlier this year. And if you look at the other areas that you mentioned, whether it is welfare, energy security, then the budgets already have made provisions for it. There has also been an effort done at the European level and at the national level to go beyond the budget deficits, or what we call as the debt brake. These have been matters which have been taken up at the European level, so that states will undertake deficit financing. But then I think it is also important, and they will have to, send that message out to their national population that external security is also contributing to what we would call as human security at this level. And for welfare, therefore, has both components, a component within the domestic, and welfare also has a component which is located at the bottom. So I think there will be little difficult decisions to take, but I think the governments will all work together, both at an individual level and at a collective European level.
Right. Thank you so much for your views, ma'am. Also joining us today is Dr. Alexei Zakharov, Fellow Strategic Studies Program, Observer Research Foundation. Sir, to what extent, according to you, could Europe's rearmament influence Russia's willingness to negotiate or engage seriously with peace initiatives in Ukraine? And does stronger deterrence help or hinder diplomatic momentum? Your take, sir.
Well, I think that the European rearmament is aimed at the long-term developments in the European security framework. So Russia is at the moment largely dismissive of the European peace proposals and is more focused on crafting a deal with the United States. So in that regard, I don't think that any changes in the European defense capabilities will facilitate the peace talks on Ukraine. And of course, the rhetoric that we can hear from both Moscow and European capitals does not help to advance the peace process in Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your views, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Lastly, we have Mr. Aman Kumar, our in-house expert, research associate at ICWA. His research focuses on Russia and post-Cold War European security architecture. So, what do you think are the structural and political factors that limit the success of Europe's planned militarization?
Thank you, Sugandhi, for the question. I happen to concur with whatever has been said by all the speakers, particularly the pace of militarization which is happening in Europe, particularly the greater acceptance of the fact in Europe that Europe needs to rearm, Europe needs to militarize. But there are certain problems which happen to impact the pace of this militarization, which happen to impact the speed of this militarization. And one of these problems are structural problems, then there are political problems. Coming back to structural problems, one of the most important of these structural problems is the fact that European military security or European military complex remains a very fragmented one. What do I mean by fragmentation? Fragmentation in very basic sense basically refers to lack of coordination, lack of integration among the various armed forces and also equipments that Europe operates. Just to give you an example, while the United States has only one kind of main battle tank, Europe has 11 or 12 of them. Now, what it does, this fragmentation does, is that it impacts basic things like maintenance. It impacts basic things like scaling of production, like mass production of these equipments, and it also impacts joint procurements in Europe, which already is a problem in Europe. So this is the most important problem. Now, coming back to other problems, we have seen after the post-Cold War. In the post-Cold War era, we have seen consistent underinvestment in European, defense capabilities, in underinvestment in building European defense and military-industrial complex. Now, that is happening to have the impact on how Europe is responding to the war in Ukraine, and that is how we have seen that Europe is still struggling. The European companies are still struggling to mass produce weapons and arms and equipments at the level which Russia is doing. That level has not been still achieved in Europe, which is another problem. There are some other problems like there is heavy dependence on the US. That dependence still continues. There are some also structural problems like there are complex procurement rules. So these all these factors come together and impact how Europe is taking care of its security and responding to the war in Ukraine. Coming back to the political problems, so on political problems, I can say that Europe is not on the same page when it comes to the threat perception coming from Russia. For example, there is greater focus on Russia as a primary threat to the national security in countries like Baltic countries or in Eastern European countries. Now, the same can't be said about many other countries. For example, Hungary. It has not been as enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine as other European countries have been. So this is one problem. Also, there are debates on concept of strategic autonomy, whether Europe should evolve as a independent autonomous player and shed its dependence on the US. This is one debate. Then there are debates on joint spending, how much spending we need to do. Debates on joint procurement. So all these debates are also there. And last but not the least, I think one important factor which has emerged very recently is the emergence of far right in Europe. Now, what this far right parties do is that they try to focus more on the domestic, political, economic, social issues. And they happen to downplay the Russian threat in Europe. And they happen to also, degrade the level of help that Europe is trying to help Ukraine in terms of finances, in terms of, arms and equipments and all these things. So this is another problem. And this is also these far right parties also happen to very advent supporters of sovereignty of the European countries, and so it also their existence, their powerful role in the European polity right now, that it happens to downplay the role of EU also, EU which is emerging as a security player. So combine all these problems, and you'll find that these problems although do not stop the militarization process, but what they do is that they try to these problems basically try to impact the pace of the speed at which this militarization is happening. So these are some of the structural, political, economic problems which I think are very important.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. I'm sure the enriching insights from our panelists will leave you with valuable perspectives to reflect on. To discover more about ICWA's panel discussion, be sure to visit our YouTube channel. Thank you.